Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Okay. I don't think we have anyone here for the first time, do we? So we all know how this operates, right? Okay. So I am Mary Johnson. You know me. You know all of our facilitators that we have here with us today. So I don't need to name them today. We have with us today Miss Deidra Willis, and she's going to actually open us up with a prayer.
Thank you. And everyone will bow their heads with me. So Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to come together on this morning. We thank you for another day. We thank you for your son who has allowed us to be here on this morning. We pray that you go before us. We pray that we send Judah first, and so we can have the praise, so there can be understanding. We know your word says, in all thy getting, get understanding. So we thank you for those who have come to be poured into, to gain understanding, so that they can also carry out the mission of wealth that passes from generation to generation. I pray for every heart and every soul that is here today, and that your kingdom continues to be advanced. In your son Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So well, Patty.
There you go, Patty. Okay. This morning, our guest is Miss Deidra Willis, and she is a certified financial planner and financial advisor affiliated with the Northwestern Mutual Wealth Management Company, which is a Fortune 100 company that exists to free Americans of financial anxiety. Well, that's heavy. Financial anxiety, yes. Okay, Deidra started her financial services practice in 2012. Prior to success in her roles as financial analyst, internal auditor, and business development manager. With her true passion of financial literacy and appetite to equip others in building wealth never escaping, Deidra decided to return to her finance roots and exit corporate America in 2012. Today, her practice is in constant growth mode and values working with women mastering their careers, professionals on the move, business owners, executives, and physicians who find value in the strategic, comprehensive planning she provides. I do want to add that I first met Deidra several years ago. It's been, almost 10 years, that I met her, and it was during the time that my family was caring for my mother, who passed away at 101.
Wow.
Okay. Luckily, my family, there were enough of us siblings that we could take care of my mother. She never had to go to an assisted living facility, a nursing home, or anything like that, because we cared for her at home. Because there was nothing wrong with her other than she was just elderly. So we were able to keep her at home and take shifts and do things like that. So I started thinking that, I have 3 children, but they all live away. And, and I'm looking at the family structure today when people don't have a lot of children, and some people don't have any children, that this is an area that we really need to look at, because we may not have enough family members to take care of elderly. Because hopefully I will become an elderly person, I hope. So, okay. Okay. So anyway.
I was waiting for it.
You were waiting for it. Okay. So anyway, I was at a conference, and Deidra was presenting at the conference, and she was presenting about long-term care, because this was a women's conference, and she really was stressing the importance of all of this. And I said, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it, and it is doable. Okay, so I'm going to let Deidra get started. Deidra, you're going to give your presentation, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. We also have a large streaming audience, and they will be sending questions in via text message and stuff. So, okay. And then we have other people who will be coming in, you know. So I'm gonna let you get started.
Well, thank you, and thank you for that introduction, Mary. I'm excited to be here with all of you. I know this is a very important conversation and topic, and that's the goal for today, is for it to be conversational. I know oftentimes when it comes to anything involving family, or even involving cost of care, you know, we don't share that. You know, what happens in here stays in here. But one of the ways for us to dispel some of those myths, or even to know that we have a plan, is by having the conversation. So I'm hoping more than anything for those in the room and those who are with us via online, we can start the conversation so that we have a healthy, you know, end of the life transition or whatever the case might be. So again, I am Deidra Willis. I'm excited to be here. I am a financial advisor, wealth management advisor as well, and I get to work with individuals of every capacity. And so before I hop into it and share a little bit about what we're going to do today, I want to know who's in the room and why you're in the room. So has anyone in here, or is there anyone today currently caring for someone that they love? Or do you know someone who's caring for someone that they love? Is anyone in here sharing any sentiments about concern in terms of how would I be able to care for myself or even other loved ones? Okay. Is there any other reason that's important as well? Because we're gonna really step through what's needed for everyone in the room. So is there any other reason anyone else would say, okay, we need to have this conversation?
Rumors that I'm hearing, or what I saw where I had a friend that was in long-term care at
Just
a
need a
nursing
mic.
care.
Excuse me.
They were dumping a lot of people in the nursing.
So just understanding, is it true how there's,
Yeah, they're dumping a lot of houseless people, a lot of people who have mental illness, with the regular older people.
got
Because
it?
they don't have anywhere else to put them. And I
Got
hear that it's increased now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I am going to speak to the capacity from a mental standpoint that does trigger a long-term care event as well. So thank you for that. Okay. Well, let's hop into it today. So, you know, we just had the conversation around providing for others. And here's the reality from a long-term care perspective. The long-term care caregiver provides about 27 hours per week for a loved one. So imagine that. That's about 3 to 4 hours a day. And so if someone, which you can see, the average caregiver age is 51. So someone who's 51 may still have children in the home. They have parents or a loved one that they're caring for. So think of the impact that it has not only on the family dynamic, but also on the finances. So one of the reasons why it's important to have a plan when it comes to long-term care is simply because there's an impact across the board for care. So we're going to speak to today very specifically is what is long-term care? I know there's a lot of questions. What does it mean? How do I cover, or what does it cover? And how much does it typically cost when it comes to long-term care? How can that be paid for? And the most important piece is making sure all of your answers and you can leave the room with clarity on today. All right, so long-term care, anybody wanna, hi Winston, how we doing? Anybody want to share what long-term care is and their definition? See, raise your hand.
Here you go, Gary.
What does long-term care mean for you? What do you think it is?
From what I've been taught, that's when you're in that, from what I understand, sandwich generation, where you're kind of between taking care and providing for your parents as well as for yourself, and might be others within your family as well, but primarily those closest to you being your parents and taking care of them.
So that's the caregiver, yeah? What is actually having long-term care mean?
To you, Dad.
I don't know, money, wealth, protection long term.
You're able to get sick.
Thank you, because it's important to know your definition when it comes to long-term care. So, long-term, yes, sir.
People screaming can't hear them without a mic.
Okay.
So my understanding was always that it was a form of additional insurance that you could acquire to cover those incidentals where there may be a lapse in your primary insurance company or insurance coverage, Medicare, Medicaid, and that long-term care would be able to provide those additional services. That's always been my understanding.
Okay, we're gonna speak to that. Anybody want to speak to what is actually the long-term care events?
I'll speak on my opinion.
Yes.
Is a person that you're taking care of for, still okay, a person that, or persons that you have to take care of for an extended period of time, I would say relatively 5 years or longer would be my definition of long-term care. Could be maybe 2.5 years, you know, they might be at the end of their life, but if someone gets ill and then you have to take care of them, they're living in your home, you have responsibility for moving them around, very similar to a child.
Absolutely. Thank you all. So all of that is correct. And I'm gonna define some of that more detail in terms of long-term care insurance, what you were speaking to. But long-term care is essentially an event in which there's a need for skilled care for an extended period of time. So generally speaking, if someone has been in this state for at least 90 days and their doctors see this continuing, there's a need for someone to come in and assist. That's considered a long-term care event. Most times we think of chronic illness, of course we think of cognitive impairments. The actual definition, I'm gonna speed up a little bit, is long-term care is when you need assistance with any of the activities of daily living. So if you have to have a need for eating or dressing or bathing or transferring or toileting, and there's a need for 2 of those, that's a long-term care event. And so it's important to know that's the Constitution. Now, of course, going back to your point around those who may be homeless or those who may have some mental concerns, a cognitive impairment also means long-term care. So most times we think of Alzheimer's or we think of dementia, but there are so many nervous system issues today that causes someone to not care for themselves. And so it's important to know that you don't have to be 90, you don't have to be 80. Going back to this slide, actually 37% of people who need care are under the age of 65. That's a relatively high amount. And so anything can constitute a long-term care if there's a need for assistance. Okay? So I want to get into long-term care because most people, when they think of long-term care, they think of nursing home automatically, right? We kind of think of this is an option we have when it comes to receiving care. But I would imagine that most people want to age in place. Is that right? Most people do best in their own environment. So if you could stay in home, you typically thrive through the need of care. Now, outside of what we just talked about, the activities of daily living, one of the biggest reasons why there will be a need for care for most of us is simply because we are living longer. So it doesn't have to be a debilitating event. If we're 88 or 92, we probably can't do the things that we used to do. So a matter of living longer is also a component to having a need for care. So of course you can see when it comes to long-term care, you can receive it in different places, whether it's in-home care, whether it's more of a community-based, what they call it sometimes adult daycare type of setting, assisted living facility is often another place, and of course nursing home. And we're gonna get into what are some of the costs, what are the average costs of care, so we can have an understanding of navigating. All right, so most of the care is received in home. And I know we talked about caring for parents. You know, we don't have the dynamics that we used to have. How many people in here have more than 5 children? More than 3. 2 hands, right? You know, I'm from a large family. It's 7 of us. And it's just amazing to see that, you know, now 2 to 3 children is a large dynamic. And so oftentimes there's gonna be some impacts when it comes to care, and most people wanna receive care at home. Most of the care is gonna come from a family member. And that's what we call informal care, right? Now the other component that's paid by caregivers or skilled care nurses, that's about 51% of the claims. So you can see, hence the reason why it's important to have something to carry you forward throughout life. I see everyone thinking, you guys with me this morning? Okay, all right. So some of the cost of care. Winston, don't look at the screen. What do you think the average cost of care is?
I don't know, about $30,000 a year.
$30,000 a year. Now you better not do this, Grace, like that. Where are you taking her to?
First of all, that's way too far. Lord.
His dad is actually.
Well, thank you, Miss Johnson. So I'm gonna tell you a lot. This whole, I can get to your last slide and say it's a headache. Yeah, everything about it is a headache.
And don't take that, I didn't mean.
Oh, no.
Are you talking about just individual, or are you talking about all the things that go, sorry. It's gonna be a little whistle. Are you thinking about, are you talking about just the individual time, or are you inclusive of whatever may be necessary, like, equipment and all those other things that go along with it?
All inclusive, because that's another piece is that.
$200,000 a year.
All right, so we have a range from $30,000 to $200,000 a year. And the truth of the matter is the cost of care really depends. So realistically speaking, there is a number at $223,000 per year. That is with inflation, and that's if you're receiving a private nursing home room. But of course, that's as we continue to progress, and we're looking at about 10 years removed. If you are receiving care in home, oftentimes you don't start at the average cost of care. So the average cost of care in the city of Charlotte is about $6,300 per month. Per month. So of course, there are some places much higher because that's the average, and some places that are a little bit lower. So going back to the $2,500 number, if I'm providing care for someone at home, we may not need round-the-clock care just yet. We may only need a few hours. That could be sufficient. But if I'm in a facility, and depending on the type of facility, it may be upwards of close to that $200,000. So you can see in-home care on average is about $96,000 per year. The adult daycare, which is more so kind of getting out, going to different services, having a social aspect, that is around that $2,500 number per month. Assisted living facility, which is about $5,000 plus, depending on the type. And then also, again, private room today is a little bit over $100,000, $127,000. This is as of 2025 research numbers. I'll tell you an example. The highest long-term care claim I personally had a client to experience was $9,000 per month. And so I do work a lot with estate planning attorneys, and oftentimes they are representing guardian ad litem. And so they can go into facilities that are $7,500 or upwards to $11,000. So just know, it's not to scare you in regards to long-term care. It's to know that this is a legitimate piece. And while we may have family, that's kind of one of the things that used to happen. We want to make sure that we can provide care in terms of the costs for ourselves as well. So how can we pay for long-term care? Let me just first say, most people have a lot of misconceptions around how I can pay for long-term care. So long-term care is not covered by health insurance. It is not covered by Medicare. It might be covered by Medicaid. It is not covered by disability. Now, although that's an income replacement plan, depending on when you have care, it could assist with care. But it can be covered by personal savings. Of course, it could be covered by long-term care insurance, and then of course by informal care. So I'm gonna get into some of these. So when it comes to health insurance, it's important to know that the health plan, long-term care is a health event, but the skilled care component is completely separate from receiving health or medical care. So health insurance is primarily for regular day-to-day or going to the hospital. Long-term care will be excluded from that. When it comes to Medicare, Medicare does assist with the cost of long-term care for the first 100 days. So essentially, there has to be what constitutes as a long-term care event, which is normally you've been hospitalized for 3 days, and then has to trigger. You can go into a facility or to the next phase. So for the first 20 days, Medicare covers 100% for the first 20 days. For the next 80 days, they share in the cost of care. So after 100 days, long-term care is now covered by you personally if you have Medicare. It's also important to know, I'm just gonna take a moment to expound, I'm pretty sure some thoughts that you guys may have when it comes to Medicare. So there are some ways of which you can qualify predicated on assets. Generally speaking, if you have assets over $2,000, you cannot qualify for assistance with the government. Over $2,000. So when it comes to understanding that component, it's critically also important to know, we talk about, oh, I need to get assets out of my name. And there are strategic ways to do that when it makes sense. It has to make sense for you, but also realize that there will be a 5-year look back. So they will go back 5 years and say, okay, it's 2026. If you own this additional rental property in 2022, you have capacity to care for yourself until you fully exhaust your assets down to that 2,000. So be mindful that there are some strategies that, of course, we can implement, but there is a period of time where they will consider all assets. All right? And in Medicaid, so Medicaid, of course, it really depends. There is eligibility, and it varies by state, right? So every state has their own state laws, and so if you do qualify, there may be some cost of care included in Medicaid. As I mentioned before, disability insurance is a little bit different. Long-term care is like the big brother to having a disability. Disability is more, I'm unable to work for a period of time. My income replaces that. So it's more replacing income, whereas long-term care is covering costs of care. And then savings. The biggest thing I would say is understanding why there are certain things in place, because long-term care doesn't mean I have to have long-term care insurance. It means I have to have a plan. Now, long-term care insurance or any form of what we call offloading the responsibility to someone else makes a lot of sense. You pay $1 for multiple dollars of care, but it may not always be in the budget. It could not be always, or always could be affordable. So it's important to know if you choose to self-insure, how that impacts us even more. It's the reason why the wealthy have things like insurance, and people might think they don't need it. It's just a matter of understanding the dollar. And so you want to be mindful that there can be some personal savings in place that can assist, but going back to the national average, it could be upwards of $72,000 to $96,000 a year for that. So we want to be mindful when it comes to long-term care planning. And if there's anything pressing as we go through, we're going to take questions for sure at the end. But if anything that I'm speaking to, please, don't hesitate to raise your hand. Good morning. Okay, so the other thing I want to speak to is that we talked about the impact on family when it comes to long-term care, which means requiring about 27 hours a week, 3 to 4 hours a day, more money out of pocket. If you're working less is being contributed to Social Security, less is being contributed to your retirement account, so there is an impact financially. But what about the impact on your retirement when it comes to long-term care? One of the reasons why it's important to have a plan is because it's a wealth protector as equally as it is to having quality care. When we start to have a long-term care debt and we have to come out of pocket, we're depleting our wealth relatively significantly. So you can see on the left, when there's no need for long-term care, we're distributing according to our needs in retirement. It's more of a smooth downward trend of exhausting assets. But on the right, if there's a long-term care impact, there's more of a drastic impact to exhausting our assets. And so not only is it, I want to have quality care, I want to have someone to care for me, I want to make sure I can still live, because again, we're living longer and we have to plan for that longevity component. We talked about informal care, so I'm going to continue to move forward. We talked about the impact of caregiving. Again, more than 1/3 oftentimes of a budget is spent towards getting care for a loved one, which is very impactful. So as you can see, specifically according to research, caregivers spend about 26% of their monthly budget on care responsibilities. And even if they're not always caring for someone to come in and be that guide or that aid, they may be coming out of pocket for other costs and other expenses. And so Again, being mindful that those we want to care for, sometimes we want to be in position to care for our parents. I think it's a beautiful thing if we can. We should start thinking about a parent's accounts. Start saving now or start investing now so we can have this capacity for events of sorts. Now, how many people in here would say they expect for their children to provide for them when it comes to long-term care? And how many people plan to care for their parents? Okay, good. That was about equal opinions. So that's a positive side of things. Now, let me ask this other question. Do both of you know that? Do each of you know that? Do your parents know that you plan to provide or don't plan to provide for them? And parents, do your children know that you expect for you to provide, for them to provide for you and vice versa? So it's important, again, that nothing is lost. When an event happens, we're actually too late to plan once an event happens. We have to do proper planning before anything comes. It's just the same way of receiving wealth. We have to know what to do with it before it comes, right? And so it's important to have these conversations to bridge the gap, expectancy. As you're transitioning or have a need for some type of care, we want to make sure that there's also a healthy experience. And so having different sentiments or feelings when my child isn't doing what I expect, perhaps they didn't know that. So it's important that we communicate those components. All right. So we talked about the activities of daily living already. And what about affordability? So we kind of got into that a little bit. But here's how you can break this down. So if you've been thinking about long-term care or the importance of having a plan in place, if you are healthy, it is very important to consider a plan that can pay for itself, which is called long-term care insurance. So by definition of healthy, of course, that's relative. It's predicated on every insurer in terms of their underwriting standards. But in most cases, you can qualify for this particular benefit. When you're looking at deciding how do I have long-term care, know that there's a few components. There's what's called a monthly benefit amount, which is in essence, what does it take for the cost of care? There's a benefit period that's important, and then there's a few other features that you want to consider. So what did I say the average cost of care was in Charlotte? $6,300, that's right. So for example, one may say, okay, it's $6,300 today. I don't expect to have a need for long-term care, one, but two, if I happen to have a long-term care event, hopefully it's years down the road. So you may consider getting a higher benefit to plan for future. Or you may consider getting a benefit that inflates so you can keep pace with inflation. Those are some of the features that's important to consider.
Can you say that again? I didn't quite understand that.
The cost of, or the inflation side of things?
Not the, you kind of combined two things. One was the escalating costs from inflation, but there was a concept prior to this.
The concept prior to not having inflation protection is going ahead and getting a higher benefit to plan for what it would be in the future. So if there is not an inflation protection benefit and I need $6,300, I might get $8,000 to plan for when there is a long-term care event. Or if I start at $6,300, I may want to add cost of living adjustment so it can inflate with the cost of care over time. So that was that concept. Now, another thing to consider is, remember, we have to make sure that whatever we choose to do, especially when it comes to insurance, is something that we can sustain and we can manage ongoing. Because I think a benefit is only as beneficial as much as you can keep it in place. So if we can't provide for $6,300 of long-term care as a benefit, consider other resources that you have. Because if you have a guaranteed stream of income, it's not going away. So how much of this guaranteed stream of income can be part of my long-term care or reduce my long-term care need? So if I'm receiving $2,500 from Social Security and I have a pension, I'm receiving $2,500 from my pension, I have $5,000 guaranteed. Perhaps I still need to pay for $2,000 of what I need to take care of my home, so $3,000 of my guarantee can be applied to my long-term care. So therefore, I'm only needing $3,000 or $3,500 of a long-term care plan. So it's important that you always look at your specific scenario when you're looking at the type of benefit, how much, the duration, etc. Now, what's also important is long-term care. So most men are on claim for about 2.4 years, and women are on claim about 4.5 years. So the duration piece is critically important as well. Mary mentioned that sometimes we care for others and we may not have someone to care for us when it's time for us to receive it. Family, children may not be local, or we may not have family or children. So think about what are the dynamics from a demographic, because it does determine oftentimes the length of having a need for care. Yes?
Can you elaborate when you say on claim?
So on claim, so the question is, can I elaborate when I say on claim? When you have a long-term care event and you have long-term care insurance, now you have proved the claim. So you're on claim and you're now receiving the benefits of that policy. So looking at statistics, on average, men receive care on claim for about 2.4 years. All right. I think we talked about everything here. The only other thing that I did mention is what's called the elimination period. This is when you would, this is the period of time, kind of like your waiting period. This is a period of time before you start to receive care, and this is where you will come out of pocket. So you want to make sure you have roughly about 12 weeks of capacity, because most elimination periods are about 12 weeks, which is 3 months. Keep in mind what I mentioned before is that Medicare was sharing the cost for the first 100 days. So that 12-week elimination period really starts right when that Medicare is ending. All right, the other thing and the last thing, and I'll kind of leave a little bit of space for questions as well, is I do want to share this because there's so many different benefits to having long-term care insurance that we just talked about, but there's two critical ones. First and foremost, that is what's called a benefit account value. In essence, I have a long-term care policy. I have $4,500 of a monthly benefit, and I have it for 72 months, which is 6 years. So if I have this policy, my benefit pool is $324,000 of a benefit. That's important for two reasons. First and foremost, monthly, I can utilize my benefit up to $4,500. So if I start to receive care and I'm only using $3,500, my benefit pool is still available to me even beyond the 72 months because I'm not using that full amount, right? So it will still be there until I fully exhaust this benefit pool. Another thing also is that if everyone residing in the state of North Carolina is what's called a partnership approved state. All that means is that states or governments have got with certain insurance companies and states stated that since this particular individual is taking the responsibility of having care in place, we're going to protect some of their assets based on the care that they have in place. So this benefit pool of $324,000 is how much of your assets you don't have to spend down before you start to receive care. So there's also partnership approved in some states with the government to provide that level of protection as well. All right. The last thing I'll mention, and then I'll just pause for questions. Sometimes things are favorable when you consider things like long-term care insurance. There could be discounts when there are spouses applying or there is companionship. There are some tax benefits, so if you are self-employed or if your cost of all of your insurance or health costs is above the AGI currently today is 7.5%, you can deduct some of your long-term care premium. All those components are critically important. And last but not least, outside of just having long-term care insurance, a lot of insurance companies today are offering what they call hybrid solutions. So you may want to have long-term care and life insurance, right? It's a combination that you can have that gives you an advantage for whatever events might happen. So I want to give a little bit of context here. I think I'm at roughly my 30 minutes. And so I'll pause here and see what questions that you may have when it comes to care.
You can continue with your presentation.
Okay.
Because we have more time.
So what I want to share for even those who are young in the room It is not too early to start planning for long-term care. As I mentioned before, 37% or 36% of those receiving care is under the age of 65. So it doesn't have to be a significant health event. Actually, you want to get anything when you don't need it. And often when you're younger, you're at your healthiest point, and so oftentimes it's favorable for us to consider those pieces. And it's not too late to start planning for long-term care. Again, long-term care is a plan. But we have this mapped out, and we know exactly how we're going to strive to move forward to. This just kind of gives an example of how many people qualify for long-term care based on age bands. So of course, as we're getting older and we're getting a little bit closer to the possibility of needing care, that qualification reduces. So it's very important to consider long-term care, as you can see on the current slide as well. And that's all that I have. So I'll pause here, take questions from the audience.
Okay, I will do what they do, they raise their hand in the order that they want. So we do have Ken, and then we have Jasmine.
Excuse the whistle. This has been a great, informative, and impressive sales presentation. Free. I want to talk later with you about a tremendous opportunity for you before an audience that identifies with your program, and it's a top of mind concern for them, and especially at the time when we discuss later. Is there a waiting period or medical evaluation to receive these benefits, like the $9.95 a month, and you get your funeral expenses paid?
Are you speaking to long-term care insurance?
Yes.
It does require a medical evaluation. So when you apply for long-term care insurance, generally speaking, it doesn't require like the blood sample or the urine sample. What they normally do is you'll answer some medical questions. They might do what's called a functional assessment, because long-term care is more about like the morbidity or bones or joints or cognitive impairment. So they're looking to see if there's anything currently or signs of needing care today. And then they'll also take a look at medical records. So that's part of the qualification process.
Okay, I do want to say this. This was not a sales presentation. It's not. It's not. I'm serious. I had her to come here because I felt that this was an important subject that we don't talk about, that we need to talk about. It's not about sales.
I know she said it's not about sales, but you did answer one of the questions I was asking in terms of, yes, I'm young. Should I start planning now? What are the insurances that I should be looking for? And you had mentioned about the assets. Like clearly I'm not there. Were you what were the strategies? Was that putting our stuff in a trust? You said so much and you answered it, but there are still a couple pieces that I'm curious. What steps should I literally be taking as somebody who's young?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, thank you for that question and thank you for being here. I would tell you, for you, it's so important for you to think about your plan for life holistically. So first and foremost, start with your vision, right? What are the things that's important to you? Even try to dream a little bit about what does retirement look like. That will shape what else should be part of your plan. When you're thinking about insurances when you're young, one of the most important pieces is probably your wealth trajectory. So if something happens to where you could not earn income, what would you want to make sure you have in place, right? And look at what you have already through your employer. If you're currently having an employer, they have group benefits. So things like your income replacement is critically important while you're working and you're still building wealth. Of course, anything can happen to us at any moment in time, so you want to have life insurance. It's just a standard. We know that this is something that's inevitably going to happen. So think about those things while you're young. Again, you can get it relatively affordable, and it's also something you can lock it in. Going back to how to protect assets, that would always be a personalized response. And the reason being is because we don't do anything just for the sake of long-term care. We don't do anything just for the sake of having a major healthcare event. We want to do that where it gives us a dual strategy. So if I desire to transfer my assets to someone that I love, and potentially that can help me with the cost of care, absolutely do that. So anything that you do, you want to make sure it pairs with the vision that you start your strategy for, first and foremost. A trust could be a really great solution, but even if you still have access to that trust, it is still considered your asset, right? So the only time it's technically not something you have access to is when it's an irrevocable trust. And you may not want that, you may not need that, you may want to change your mind on different components. And so it will always be very much so personalized, but if you know, once you can get clear on the vision, not just for you, but for your generations to come, everything really will align from a planning perspective with that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that information. You were mentioning funding the long-term care, and one of the things we've seen is people leveraging the equity in their house. Are you seeing that that is something that people do on the heels of that asset question that she was asking?
Not a lot. Oftentimes it's more of the last resort. So they've exhausted other resources and now they have to go to their home to leverage long-term care. Most people don't start with that because it's still a liability to some degree of making sure that I don't get to a state where I don't have a place, but it is an asset, or it can be a leverage asset when it comes to being able to pull it for resources.
Hey, Deidra. Hey, Deidra.
Hey, Jay Hill.
How you doing? Thank you for being here. All right, let's get to this money right quick. All right, so you got some young folks in here. I want to know, like, without you telling me how much money you put into some of the tools that you use, but like, what are some instruments we should be using right now for wealth building? Like, what do you use and what do you recommend to some young folks?
Excellent question. So a couple of things in terms of building wealth. First and foremost, we have to have capacity. So before we want to start building wealth, make sure we have a solid plan for any what is, meaning a savings account, right? So start with our savings strategy first and foremost. A really sound number is that we should minimally probably be setting aside 5 to 10% of your take home per month. If you're already at your savings goal, so you master, I would say master having 3 to 6 months, maybe even more savings, we want to start to shift that so we can have some level of growth. Generally speaking, if we don't plan to touch their money anytime soon, let's now look at an investment strategy. We want to start having money grow for us, right? And so anything above 9 months, oftentimes if it's not earmarked for a major purchase or something that's forthcoming, we're actually starting to lose purchasing power with having it in a savings account. And that's simply because we're not growing at the same rate of inflation when we have money in the savings. So anything savings, high yield savings account, anything above the 9 months, or if you're at your 6 or 3 month goal, start to shift that to what we call like a brokerage or an individual investment account. If we want to save for retirement, of course, above and beyond your employer, save to, if you have the income status, a Roth is a really great tool, simply because we know that we can pay taxes now while we're still earning wealth and we're in the lower tax bracket and there's no taxation later. So those are some specific tools that I would share when you're young to start building wealth so we can have other assets that we can leverage for assisting parents or even ourselves, and certainly the next generation we get older.
Yes.
I just told Rob that you pretty much answered all the questions that I had, but let me see. So maybe you answered this. How do you recommend balancing the trade-off between affordability now, premiums elimination period, and maximizing long-term protection, especially considering inflation and the likelihood of needing care later in life?
Excellent question. That is probably the hardest thing to do. It is the number one reality that we all face because it is a trade-off. We have to give up something often to get it. Here's the first thing I'm going to say. I'm going to speak from my clients' perspective who are older, and I hear them say all the time, I wish I would have known about this. I wish I would have done this sooner. Now, of course, timing is everything because it's still based on the capacity. So what I would say is, realistically speaking, when it comes to managing risk, so there's 3 critical components: managing risk, There is also investing or saving for a future, and there is simply planning for liquidity today. If you can do all three of those by taking about 20% of income, we can achieve that desire. So managing risk or trading off 3 to 5% is very fair and reasonable because I'm not sacrificing investing and or saving. So I would say, look at your capacity. And once you take a look at the capacity that you have, prioritize what is most important for me in terms of my protection, and let that be your starting point, because where you are today won't be where you'll be forever. You will have greater capacity to continue to plan.
Can you say those three again? Managing risk and...
So there are 3 critical components. So for example, if anyone is coming and having a conversation about financial planning and building wealth, we want to make sure that we can save, or what we call have liquidity. We want to have a plan for growth, which is more investing, and then we want to have a plan for protection. So those are the 3 components that you would take 20% of capacity and divvy across those components as your base plan.
Good morning again, Ms. Deidra.
Yes.
Here's my question. We think so often about us as getting older or our parents. Is there anything that we can set up for our children? Because at the end of the day, the reality of it is all of us are just a second away from needing somebody to take care of us. So is there any plans that you can start maybe a 10 or 15-year-old kid with for that is extremely healthy, but it will be inexpensive for them now?
Absolutely.
And does it have any ACV?
Absolutely. There's a lot that we can do for our children today. Do we know the number one thing that we can do for our children today more than anything? Educate. They need to be in the room. So when they are 12 and 13 or even 18 and 19 in college, this is not a foreign concept. First thing to your question, Rob, it's unfortunate to know that 70% of wealth is lost to the second generation and 90% to the third. And it's not because wealth is not being transferred, it's because knowledge is not being transferred. So that's the first thing, is that we gotta make sure that this money conversation, although it can be tense, or it carries so many different emotions, or our parents don't wanna talk about it, we have to break that so that they can have the awareness of what it means to be really great stewards when it comes to managing finances. Now, what we can establish really depends, right? You can do insurance, you can do a savings account, you can do an investment account. If you operate a business, they can be on your payroll. You can fund their Roth account. So it all really depends on what we want to accomplish. Yes, you can start with $25 a month. You can start with $50 a month. And if you have the capacity to do that continuously and just constantly increase it, 20 years removed, 30 years removed, 40 years removed, it compounds. There's this thing called a rule of 72. You know how money works. You don't have to do anything for it. It's going to constantly work. And so it's really great to think about how you can start with something small, but yet a regular cadence that's consistent. And they could be a millionaire because you invested $20,000 over the course of their life and this money compounded. So it's just different components to that degree. Yes, do the baseline of insurance, do the baseline of savings, do the baseline of investing. And then strategically, if you own a business, there's some things that you can do for your children as well.
Okay, it's Winston now has an online.
Winston has an online. Winston. Winston.
So we have an online question from Crispin. Crispin asks, what is the catch here? If someone has a medical emergency and needs Medicaid, how does having life insurance affect their eligibility, especially when they've been taught that life insurance is something they should have?
So from a Medicaid perspective of eligibility, that is completely different from like a long-term care component of eligibility. To my knowledge, I am not aware of life insurance impacting the eligibility of Medicaid. Medicaid is more so, of course, there are certain policies that carry what we call cash value pieces, but it's more so considering resources outside of the cash component piece. So there could be a factor, Crispin, as it relates to that, but generally speaking, it is favorable for that to happen or to be in place and doesn't impact the Medicare status in most cases.
Rob Hillman, question for
cash that check.
Question for you.
Yes.
It's really about affordability, and again, it's kind of difficult in an audience where everybody's got a sort of a different circumstance, but how do you go about affording long-term care? Again, clearly there's something, get it sooner rather than later, get it before there's an event rather than after one, but again, the question is really, how do you go, what are the premiums like? Can we talk about ranges or, because I don't think we talked about that.
Yeah, because it's so vast, and that's the reason why it's hard to speak to it when there's some people in the room in their 20s or 30s, and some people in the room, in their 70s. But what I will share is the cost of care is gender specific. So the cost for men is less than the cost for women. And the reason being is because women live longer and they use the claim longer, generally speaking. So they right-size that to be gender specific. Now the flip side is the case when it comes to life insurance, right? It's more for men, less for women. So for example, what would determine the cost of care depends on how much monthly benefit you have compared to the duration of the benefit. So most people might spend probably on average about $300, potentially even more for long-term care insurance. So it really just depends on per month. Mm-hmm. So it really just depends on when they get it, how much they have. Someone who's getting it today, maybe in their 40s, they may be paying $120 for long-term care. A couple in their 60s who may be having a higher benefits, they might be paying $500 for long-term care. So it really just depends on factors around the benefit.
What is your experience or industry in regards to the numbers of the demographic of people who are actually buying this insurance or taking advantage of this? Is it like 10% in the 30 to 50 range, or what?
In terms of age?
Yeah, age and demographic.
So about 6-7 years ago, the average age when people bought long-term care was around 54. Today, the average age, I've seen two different numbers, it's 49 and 51. So it's trending to a lower age in terms of when people start to get the actual cost of care. I'll share with you my oldest client who purchased long-term care was 78. And my youngest client who purchased long-term care was 31.
I do have a question regarding life insurance. Normally when we're young, we're thinking about our families, and if something were to happen and we're young, how could they be able to continue on? And we tend to make sure that we have that in place. Does it make sense at some point in time to drop the life insurance coverage and use those resources towards some type of long-term care? Because typically you pay down on your debt, hopefully your house, those major things that you have in the early part of your life have already been taken care of financially. Does it make sense at some point to say, okay, I'm gonna stop paying on this life insurance policy and redirect those funds towards some type of long-term care policy?
Speaking on behalf of all of the financial advisors, I don't think we would probably recommend anyone to drop. We may recommend making some changes because when you have life insurance, oftentimes the need for insurance become a need for capital. And so if I've built capital up in other places, maybe I don't need this $1 million benefit anymore. I may only need $600,000. Maybe I can reduce it. So before actually dropping it, we'll probably look at alternatives. And the reason is because life insurance is one of the best ways to transfer wealth. So if I can transfer wealth tax-free, we probably won't recommend that. It also depends on the type of policy that you have, because some policies allow you to use some of the benefits of life insurance to cover the cost of long-term care. So it really just depended. Like if it was a term solution that we know it's not gonna be there forever and we didn't really need it and it was relatively costly, and we've gotten through most of those expenses, yes, perhaps we can modify that plan. But in most cases, there are so many benefits that I don't know when we will actually drop the benefit.
Hi, yes, What are some tips? You alluded to this earlier about making sure that your children and parents are aware of what's happening. How do you, what do you recommend to introduce these conversations, especially for people that, just to put it lightly, are hard-headed and may not take their long-term care seriously? What are some tips you can bring to the conversation?
Listen, to break the ice, right? First and foremost, use me. I would just tell you to say, listen, I went to this event, I learned some really great things, and just had me thinking. And here's what you can do, because again, generations are different. Generations were taught different things, and you have to respect that in terms of where they're coming from. But just say, have you thought about what your desires are if you were to ever get to a point where you needed someone to care? Like, you don't have to say, what do you have? Do you have long-term care? And what? So have you thought about that, right? I went to this session. Use that. Or you can just simply say that, hey, I started to do my plan. I want to share with you what I have or what I'm thinking. And the moment you do that, it opens up space for the conversation for that to be received based on what they've been thinking about. And it may take some time, right? Oftentimes, a lot of my clients will bring in their parents, and I do recommend that. I think the planning that we should be doing is intergenerational, because it's impacting us across all generations. And so as much as you can leverage, try to offload it with something different. But just even when you have family reunions or when you have family meetings, make this a topic point for us to start thinking about, because it is a legacy piece, and that's important for most of us. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Earlier, Deidra, right here. Earlier, when you asked me my definition of long-term care, I alluded to something called sandwich generation, where, people find themselves sandwiched between caring for the kids, caring for their parents. Can you speak on that a little bit more? Because I know in today's terms, we're finding at least 50% of the workforce over 40 is going through this particular issue.
You're absolutely correct. This is a real thing, and most of us probably have experienced it to some degree. The reality of it is that we would never stop caring for our children to some capacity, even when they become a little bit older, right? But if we have parents, again, parents are living longer, all of us are living longer, we know that there's still a need to care for them. So the hard part is, how do I still take care of myself in the midst of caring for everyone else? One of the things that's so important is if you are a caregiver, you should seek out resources for what's called caregiver training, because it really helps you to navigate just what do I need to do, like how can I adjust, how do I adjust my plan. Another thing is to think about the resources of people. Who can I pull to assist? Because I'm probably going to need someone to be handy to assist me with my children at some point, or even maybe to drop something off to my parents at some point. So you got to think about the assistance of people. The reality of it as well is really how it impacts us, because I may have to be out of work 1 week a month, or at various times, and that's a real thing. So that means I'm earning less. Or if I operate a business, which I do, I have to make sure I have the right people in place so that the business can still thrive. And so it's so important that we do have this conversation, or even talk to your spouse or your friends or your companion that, okay, we gotta really start thinking about how we are able to navigate. I would tell you, I have this amazing couple, and they created a parents account probably about 7 years ago, just to make sure should something come into play, not even just long-term care, anything that's needed. Oftentimes, we're relied on, that's our community. We cover everyone, we provide for each other. We want to make sure that we're not hindering anything that we need to do personally. So as much planning as we could possibly do, if we have that capacity, peel off something small to start to build that up. That would help tremendously. So I would certainly say have the conversation, solicit your friends and your siblings, your spouse, so that we can be prepared mentally more than anything for that experience.
Hey Deidra, Jay Hill again. All right. I think this is the room to have this conversation. I feel like there are other races that when it comes to wealth building, I'm going back to this, that as soon as they have a child that's born, they're getting policies and things, and they're using insurance as a vehicle to build wealth. And I feel like oftentimes in our community, the only thing we're thinking about, a lot of times, we're thinking about burial benefits and how to make sure Uncle James got some insurance and all that kind of stuff. So can you talk more about how other races are even also looking at careers in as far as financial planning? Thank you.
Thank you for that. So first and foremost, life insurance is a very powerful tool. I know that we know that this has been something that's been around for the longest. So you probably, everyone have heard of the Rockefellers, right? They wrote a book. What would the Rockefellers do? Another thing I want to mention is that I want to commend every race, but I also want to say specifically, Jay, that our race is doing a lot of that as well. The sooner we can get the education and the knowledge, now we know how this works. Because oftentimes people will sell you this tool, and it's powerful, but a tool is only as powerful as you know how to use it. So before you sign up for anything, make sure you get the understanding. But from a life insurance perspective, particularly, the one thing I would share with you that's most important when it comes to your children is guaranteeing their insurability, because life insurance is age and health sensitive, and the biggest piece is actually health. So if you have it early, we know that we've locked in their health, and there's ways where they can get more without even having to prove their health later. Another critical component is when you do have something such as life insurance, oftentimes that growth is not taxable. So not only is it compounding, but it's compounding what we call tax deferred or tax advantage. And then at some point, it can be a lever too, depending on how you structure it, depending on how you design it, depending on how you fund it. It could support education, it could support them buying a home at some point or a down payment, or it could simply be a part of retirement. So it is indeed powerful, and it's certainly something that if you have the capacity, I would recommend it for multi-use, right? There's so many ways of which you can leverage that particular piece. Now, what I will also say, Jay Gill, to your point, you know, the moment we put money into these tools, we can't use it tomorrow, right? We're ready to take the money out tomorrow. We're ready to take it out in 2 years. It is more of a longevity component. It is a wealth building tool. We gotta apply time to it. You know, if we've made a purchase and sometimes we think this is a really good purchase, we don't know until time has been applied, right? Was this really a good purchase? This might have been the best purchase or the worst. So you have to give it time, because that compounding piece is really the greatest component. The greatest piece is that time. So yes, I encourage it for everyone who have children. And I know it's hard to think about having life insurance, but now when you can see the benefits on the other side of it. And I encourage it for everyone who has the capacity from a health standpoint to have it in place.
Deidra, thank you. How do you recommend integrating long-term care planning into a broader portfolio strategy so that we're not just protecting against downside risk, but also preserving liquidity and optimizing assets for generational transfer?
Ooh, this is speaking my language. Thank you for that question. So here's what I want to share real quickly. There are 6 major risks when it comes to retirement. The first one is longevity. Most people think it's the market. It is not. The first risk that we have is outliving our money. It's a real thing. The second risk is a major healthcare event. So if we don't think about long-term care, because I would never have a long-term care event, I don't think I should get it. Insurance is bad. I heard all these things. My grandma said this. That could be their situation or scenario. Your experience must be unique to you. So more than anything, considering the fact that a major healthcare event can completely derail my retirement plan, can completely exhaust my portfolio, I should have it in place. They're actually integrated already. So as I mentioned before, you saw the benefit pool. If you have $4,500 on a monthly basis for 6 years, that's $324,000 of assets that I'm exhausting for the cost of care. So when you think about the long-term care piece, yes, it protects your liquidity because I'm using someone else's money, OPM, other people's money versus my own. I am also preserving my retirement, which means I can transfer more of a legacy piece. I'm not exhausting generational legacy due to a healthcare event. And then more importantly, have peace of mind. So when you think about the integration, all those are factors so that you can sustain the liquidity, more wealth, and actually perpetuate wealth as well. Great, really great question.
So my question is going to deviate a little bit from the financial aspect of preparing for long-term care. As Ms. Mary shared in the beginning, she came from a large family and they cared for their parents individually. What would you suggest for individuals that are caregivers? Because it is a huge mental weight that you tend to deal with even after your parents pass on. It's still something that you're still recovering from to a certain degree. Post-traumatic stress disorder, where the phone rings in the middle. You're constantly at that point where you're always on edge. What would you recommend for individuals to deal with that mental part of being a care provider?
Newport Light 100.
Listen, we're not gonna
Newport
recommend
Light
that.
100.
So the first thing is, and by no means am I a licensed therapist, but what you have to do is that you have to acknowledge it first and foremost. Like sometimes when that happens, and especially when we lose a loved one, we try to go on. And that's probably not the best thing to do. So we have to acknowledge the fact that what we just experienced, and then also really kind of document sometimes those sentiments of how we felt, because that's getting it out, right? I had a dear friend who really spent time with a parent and who eventually passed away. And there were so many different points throughout the day where I had to pause to take this, give this medication, I had to give this shot, I had to do these different pieces. You have to turn off those alerts too. You have to kind of sometimes minimize the triggers, because those things are gonna be natural to some degree, but oftentimes there's a trigger there. And then if you need to have some level of support, I would say certainly receive support. In the midst of that, what you can do to kind of help get back to you is just get back to envisioning your life. What do I desire? What did I experience? How do I want that to be different for me? How do I want to make sure my children have a different experience, right? So I think it's just really having a honest heart-to-heart with yourself to address that experience.
Thank you again. I was asking about the housing earlier, and what you were talking about is respite, and when you're providing that care for other individuals. Aging in place versus aging in a facility, as far as cost of care there, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in that space with those two options?
Absolutely. Most people desire to age in place, and most people are aging in place as a starting point, and it's oftentimes a gradual deal of getting to where I may have to go to a facility. So the natural progression is if we get to a point to where maybe we can't have the round-the-clock care, or we don't think it's safe for our parents to be still age in place, maybe there's an assisted living facility, which is the next transitional piece, and they thrive there with having some level of assistance, some level of community, and then we get to the point of potential of having a nursing home. But most people desire to age in place, and we see that quite a bit. Again, medical advances, we're living longer, we're living healthier longer, and there is potentially still a need for care, but not to the extent where we can't still have some mobility and care for ourselves.
I want to thank you for everything you've said. At one point in my life, I was a financial advisor as well. I'm not in that business anymore, and I think you're doing an excellent job at providing information to people. One of the things that you talked about that I want to get some clarity around is, I think you said something about the 20% rule. Is that you're talking about saving 20% of your income? Was that what you're getting at? Because I wasn't sure.
The 20% rule is when you think about planning, which is kind of like what we call the baseline rule. This is ideal just from a base perspective, and that just simply means if I were to take 20% of my income off the table, I'm giving an assignment to the 3 critical pieces so that should something ever come my way, I have a plan in place. And so that 20% is just really the starting base. Some people can do above that, some people can't really do at that level. But if you have that 20% capacity, we recommend 5 to 10% goes towards saving if we're not fully sufficient on the savings. 6 to 8% goes towards investing, primarily long-term if there's funding or matching through employer. And then 3 to 5% goes towards protection or risk management, if you will. So that's the baseline as a starting point. And then again, of course, some people will have greater capacity to do above and beyond that. Some people can only do 10% total. So you really make it unique to your scenario. Absolutely.
Good morning. This is more so, can I get your response to a comment? I am a former retired activist, and ironically, I had somebody in law enforcement.
What is that?
Yeah, no, I'm retired. Anyway, I had a law enforcement officer actually tell this to me, a black one, no less. He said, if more black and brown people had life insurance policies on their kids, these officers would stop killing y'all. Just curious to hear your response to that.
Wow. That's my initial response.
Right. But I'm like, done, baby.
You know, I don't know if I have a response to that from the standpoint of how it was given.
Yeah.
If someone knows there's life insurance on someone else, they wouldn't kill them. You know, the motive is always what drives someone to make a decision. You know, it's not that. But what I will say, and what I will also clarify, believe it or not, according to LIMRA, black people have the most life insurance. Now, let me tell you what that means. Per capita, black people have the most life insurance. Just meaning that we believe in it. Here's what's not stated in that research. We don't have the appropriate amount of life insurance. We have the $25,000, maybe the $50,000 policy. Other races may have the millions or higher level of capacity. So we believe in it, but we have the barrier policies, which sometimes that's the benefit we have to have based on what our scenarios are. So there's still a level of knowledge that goes into having these plans in place. But what I will say, that question, I would say disregard whoever stated that, right? They don't have the knowledge base.
I disregarded it already.
Okay, we're gonna go with Winston. Thank you. Winston.
All right,
Winston is the last question.
Okay, Deidra, so again, just for the life insurance purposes, for conversation. Again, a lot of people get lost because there's so much jargon, there's so much, the phrasing in the conversation. What are the simple basics a person should have when it comes to life insurance? What does it mean? Whether it's term, what is something base level for at least an understanding to develop more sophistication later? But what is the space that everyone should start when it comes to life insurance?
Absolutely, this is a really great question. Let's get into this. So first and foremost, what you see on social media is not your situation. Secondly, what you hear on commercials is not a real thing. You cannot get a $10,000 policy for, or whatever the policy might be for X amount. There's always something, it's a stipulation there. So when you're planning for life insurance, here's what you need to do for you and your family. First and foremost, what do I want for this insurance to do? What are my desires? Most people say they want their mortgage taken care of. If that's a goal, write down that number. Some people say they want to make sure they're clear any type of liabilities, be it vehicle, be it credit card, be it student loans if it's not federal. Write down your liabilities so that no one else is responsible for that. Personally, you plan for your final expense wishes, whether that is cremation or burial. You write that down and you get that average cost. And with final expenses, also include what we call emergency fund debt. So if family got to move things around, hospital bills, etc. So once your liabilities are off the plates, now you want to go to what are my desires. So going back to your point, Winston, if I have children, do I want to assist them with education or an endeavor? You plan for that. You write that number down. And then here's the biggest reason why life insurance was created next to a final expense. It's called income replacement. So in the event I'm not here, but I'm bringing home $10,000 a month and my family is relying on half, do I want to replace that half and for how long? So now if I know I want to replace this $5,000 for 10 years, I'm going to account for that number. So the first thing you have to do when it comes to life insurance is determine what your needs are, what your desires are. And when you take a look at that now, the type is important. Type is secondary to having the appropriate amount. Because we can't have really great permanent life insurance, which it is, but we don't have enough to provide for our family. So now you go and take a look at, okay, out of my liabilities, some of those things are going to expire. Some of those things are going to go away. You can get that in a temporary solution, which is called term. But for things that are permanent, for things that never go away, such as my final expense, my legacy desires for my children, you want to get that in a permanent solution. So in the simplest of form, determine what you desire for your family to have or the level of dignity that you want them to maintain, and then you pair the type to what you're solving for. And that simplifies that life insurance planning question. Great question.
Okay.
Let's give Deidra a hand. Great information. And I know a lot of us in here are, retired or whatever, but we do have children that we need to explain this to, let them see this. Also, where's Jasmine? She's not here. I just wanted Jasmine to know that Deidra is a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. Oh, okay. So I will let Jasmine know. She's a neophyte. Okay. So we just thank you so much for being here, and let's give her another hand. At this point, we're going to take announcements.
If you have an announcement, hand up, please.
Well, it finally came to this. My good friends, and those of you who really have cared for me, I really appreciate it. And the reason we have the elder over here is because the bishop got tired of y'all looking at him and talking about, when you gonna get his teeth fixed? Well, guess what? And I want to say to all y'all, this hurts like hell, and y'all.
You'll get over it.
I got 24 more hours to wear this before I can take them off, and those of you who share the sentiment, before it really gets to the work. Thank you for your caring. Thank you for your sentiments. And now, Laura and Mary can go to lunch with me again without being embarrassed.
Rob Hillman, CEO of Queen City Robotics. I want to encourage you all to go to qcra.eventbrite.com and follow Queen City Robotics on that. Specifically, I've got about 150 to 250 seats in summer camps, STEM summer camps, at 2 locations at this point, and we're looking to open up in a third. The first one is down in Steel Creek at the Queen City Robotics facility. The second one is at Grace Covenant Academy in Cornelius. And I really want to encourage, we really need to get our young people engaged and involved in robotics. And I'd say, I've been at the facility down in South Charlotte, Steel Creek. I've got 300 kids. Only 20 of them are Black, African American. 1 of them is female. We can do better. There are scholarships available for folks who are on public assistance or attend Title I school.
What's the age?
We have 2 groups. 4th through 8th grade is one grouping, and then 7th through 12th grade is another group. And the site is qcra.eventbrite.com. And if you follow us, you'll see all of the events that come through. The camps are on there. We have certain community events that are on there. Really trying to, one of the reasons that I became the CEO is because we realized, I was on the board, and we realized that we needed to basically put the best face on trying to get the people who were not in the room into the room.
Can you give that information to Steve to put on the?
Hey, on Saturday, March 21st at 1 p.m., State Representative Jordan Lopez for District 112 will conduct a town hall at the Four Seasons Clubhouse located at 5050 Farm Pond Lane. If you're a resident of District 112, please come out and hear from our State Representative Jordan Lopez.
And I want to encourage you, if you haven't already, make sure you get on YouTube and follow Greater Seven Thoughts. You can keep up with all my previous radio shows and the ones to come. Greater Seven Thoughts on YouTube. Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to announce there is an opportunity for persons to receive a free laptop with 14 hours of training, and that training goes anywhere from basic to Canva, AI, Gemini, ChatGPT, cybersecurity. If you're interested, let me know, because I think I missed a couple of people last week, but I'll be happy to give you the information. Thank you so much.
Anyone else?
I have a question.
I forgot to let you all know that to thank Deidra for bringing the snacks today. She brought the donuts and oranges and I know she was wonderful, and the bagels and cream cheese. So she's setting a standard now for our presenters. Women do it. That's how women roll. You know, we feed people. Yeah, that's right. We do it all. Okay, I need to let you know about next week. Next week we have our very own Blanche, who's coming to talk about her books. She's written 3 books. She's an author, and she wants an opportunity to share her books with everyone. Also, she is the founder of the Silver Fox Cheerleaders. And has anybody in here seen the Silver Fox Cheerleaders? I think some of you have. Okay. Okay, these are senior citizen cheerleaders, and they're called the Silver Fox Cheerleaders. And I told her to please see if you can round up a few of them to come to so that we can see what they do. So that's really going to be fun. So now, then the next week we're going to talk about an illness that's affecting a lot of Black women, and we are just learning about it. It's called multiple myeloma, and it's really, really out there now. So we need to know it's a blood disease, and you don't know that you have it until it rears its ugly head. Okay, that's when you find out you have it. But there are things that you can do prior to that. So I'm going to let Winston send us out.
All right, y'all heard who's coming next week. Join us for another free rendition of the Tuesday Morning Forum. Sarah Stevens, Tuesday Morning Forum. Dr. Thomas, play us out.
Y'all know we won 2 state championships last week.
Oh, yes. Oh. Dr. Thomas, stop it. Hold on. Cut it, Dr. Thomas. Thank you. We have another champion to celebrate in the West Charlotte and Mallet Creek basketball teams. North Mac as well. However, y'all know I'm biased. Shout out to the West Charlotte Lions. Don't forget, last semester they won the 3A football championship, and just the other day won the 8A basketball state champion. That's right, jumped 5 whole A's and won another state championship. Speaking to the excellence of the West Charlotte High School, Dr. Thomas, now please play us out.
You didn't say Duke University. They do that.